Hi, I'm Morgan Pratt, and this is my presentation on Stiff, The Curious Life of Human Cadavers, written by Mary Roach. In this presentation, I'm going to be moving through the book by chapter because the way Roach splits her writing is each chapter talks about a different use for cadavers and a different piece of their history. So, chapter 1, A Head is a Terrible Thing to Waste, is about Roach's experience going to medical institutions while she's doing research for her book. She talks about how the decapitated heads of cadavers are laid out on tables for medical students to perform practice surgeries on. She thinks a lot internally throughout the whole book, in this chapter specifically, about who does the decapitating of the head once the cadaver is dead. These cadavers in the medical universities serve to give surgeons practice before performing the real surgery on patients that are alive, where there is more risk involved. In Chapter 2, Crimes of Anatomy, Roach talks about the seriousness and respect that human cadavers are treated with at universities today and medical schools, telling the story of a memorial service held at UCSF Medical School for the remains of cadavers that have been used in the gross labs at the school. She also goes through the history of grave robbers and how cadavers used to be black market trading items. Prior to the 1700s, anatomists and scientists would pay good sums of money for men to go into graveyards and steal bodies that would then be brought back to their lab and used for research. Chapter 3, Life After Death, talks about the process of human decay and the stages a dead body goes through when it is just left outside to rot, or buried in the ground to rot. Roach visits a research lab dedicated to the purpose of studying the process of human decay and describes a scene of cadavers lying in a fenced-in field being studied, all at different stages of decay. The professor that shows her around explains how the immune system, bacteria in the bodies, and tissue of a human body react and change through each stage of decay. The stages of decay are first fresh, bloat, active decay, advanced decay, and then dry remains. Chapter 4, Dead Man Driving, is about Roach's experience while witnessing a cadaver being used as a crash test dummy. White cloths were placed over the face and hands, as you can see in this picture, of the cadaver to depersonalize it for the people working at the site. The crash itself takes about half the amount of time that setting up the cadaver and getting him in the right position takes. Because a cadaver cannot hold himself up, the two employees of the facility must lean him to be as close to the position an alive person would be in while sitting in a car. It is a balancing act because he keeps slouching and falling out of the seat. The studying involving the cadaver was the study that they were doing that was had the cadaver. He was not wearing a seatbelt, so he kept falling out of the seat, so it was really hard to position him right. Cadavers throughout history have helped scientists to further the safety of cars enormously. Chapter 5, Beyond the Black Box, talks about plane crashes and how evidence is studied from cadavers that were in accidents, and it's used to discover how a plane crash occurred. For example, if a bomb went off in a plane, then the skin of the cadavers sitting in the seats near the bomb would be burned on the front because the seat backs would protect some of their neck. However, if there are burns equally around the entire cadaver or mostly on the back of the cadaver, then while it may look like a bomb went off due to the radioactivity detected and the amount of damage done, a more likely explanation of the burns would be chemicals or fire broken loose on the plane. Roach meets with an expert whose job it is to determine how plane accidents were caused based on the state of the bodies involved. Chapter 6, The Cadaver Who Joined the Army, talks about bullets and how cadavers have been used to study the power of a bullet. Roach asks the question she's asking in this chapter is, why do people fall over when shot, even when not seriously wounded? If someone's shot in the leg, why do they fall over, even though they will survive? It is concluded that the reason people fall is purely psychological. They fall simply because of the awareness that they have been shot, not because of the pain. Chapter 7, Holy Cadaver, was one of the odder chapters in this book, if that is even possible. It talks about cadavers and their involvement in religion, specifically Catholicism. Roach tells us about Dr. Pierre Barbet, who would nail cadavers to a makeshift cross he built in his garage to figure out where specifically Christ's hands or wrists were nailed. Barbet studied the bloodstains and paintings of Jesus nailed to the cross and he figured out that they were 60 degrees and 7-degree angles of bloodstains running down his wrists. That suggested that he propped himself up at some points while he was hanging on the cross to relieve pressure and then fell back down again. Barbette measures the angles, trying to figure out if this was possible that Jesus could have done that, propped himself up, and he nailed several cadaver detached arms to the cross with the weight of 100 pounds on the other end, and the nails ripped right through the arm. He then tried to nail the wrists of cadaver arms and figure out how the angle of the nail had gone into the wrists, etc. When Roach was interviewing with him, he said at one point people began to hear about what he was doing, and he received phone calls from a couple of people who wanted to volunteer themselves to be nailed to the cross for his research. These were usually very religious people who wanted to do this in order to be closer to Jesus and understand the pain he went through. Chapter 8, How to Know If You're Dead, is about live burial and the definition of being brain dead. It touches on the topic of organ donation and the belief system of different people and religions around when someone is truly dead, and where the soul of a human lives. It is a big debate, even sometimes in the scientific world, if the soul of a person lives in the heart or the brain. At one point, the soul of a person was thought to be found in the liver, which is a very interesting idea. Chapter 9, Just Ahead, talks about scientists who have tried to figure out how to do head transplants, taking organ donation one step farther. There was one case where a doctor was able to transplant the head of one monkey onto the neck of another, and another case where they transplanted the head of a dog onto the neck of another dog, so that it was literally a two-headed dog and monkey. But the most successful one, which involved the monkeys, ended up the monkeys only living for about 3 hours, and there was lots of blood. The monkeys really had no function, but both heads just seemed to show some sort of awareness, so they counted it as a successful trial. Chapter 10, Eat Me, talks about the role cannibalism has played in history and how in ancient Egypt, cadavers were put in coffins of honey and sealed for 100 years, and then when the coffin was opened, 100 years later, people would spread what was on the inside, the honey mixture, all over their wounds as medicine, oftentimes eating it as well. It was used to treat diseases, which back then, if someone got a bruise, they thought it was a life-threatening disease. So there was oftentimes they would apply the honey to that bruise as well. Chapter 11, Out of Fire, Into the Compost Bin, revolves around alternative funerals. It touches on the history of cremation and also the new and upcoming idea of tissue digestion, which is also known as water reduction, as well as a method involving freeze drying. This chapter is basically exploring the possibility of human bodies being composted and stays with one environmentalist and scientist who is trying to make the idea of letting your body compost and use it in fertilizer in people's gardens and fields as it decays a popular idea in this day and age. Chapter 12, Remains of the Author, is about what Roach wishes to do with her body after she is dead. Obviously, she has extensive knowledge on the different options that there are, and she knows in depth what is the pros and cons of each one. She decides in the end that she wants to be plastinated, preserved in perfect condition through a process that stops her body from decaying or changing in any way. It takes about a year to plastinate a whole body, but another way they do it is they take organs, like a brain, a human brain, and they would plastinate just the brain and put it in a glass jar. It's the type of plastination is the type of thing you see in a science museum. All those glass jars with pieces of humans in them, those are plastinated limbs and so forth. She decides that to be a brain in a glass jar, that would be the most beneficial way that people can get right up close to her and learn about the human body and see it firsthand without being repulsed by the smell or the image of what a real decaying dead body looks like. This was one of my favorite quotes in the book. It says, get involved with science, be an art exhibit, become part of a tree. Some options for you to think about. Death. It doesn't have to be boring. I really like this because I felt like it really gave a sense of what this book was really about, showing people all the ways that their bodies can be used and um, kind of explaining the use of cadavers and a history of cadavers for the public to really understand. The other quote I had was, you're holding this disconnected hand and it's holding you back. This quote was in reference to when she visited the car crash, the crash test dummy cadaver, and the woman who was positioning the cadaver to try and make him sit right up was holding his hand, um, because she had to kind of do that to prop him up, and she really was explaining that it's not just like an object that you're holding, it's really like the cadaver is a person, and you need to treat it that way with respect. And as you hold their hand, it's kind of like they're holding you back as well. The first big idea I thought this related to was the process of evolution drives the diversity and unity of life. I believe Stiff connects to this idea because we can see evolution very clearly in this book. We see people evolving in the way they treat cadavers through time, from people stealing cadavers from their graves to them holding long personal memorial service, like the one at UCSF Medical School, for detached limbs that were used in research in the growth lab, which is a very not personal thing, but the amount of respect they show, and the evolution from taking bodies out of graves, I thought really related to this idea. Living systems store, retrieve, transmit, and respond to information essential to life processes. I believe this is important and relevant to Stiff in an odd way because this entire book is about dead bodies, which cannot transmit or respond to much of anything. But in this book, we see many people who use cadavers to further their understanding of living systems, such as how cadavers respond to car crashes, embalming, decapitations, transplants, etc. It is all very relevant because the study of cadavers is helping to further human knowledge on living humans, even though the ones they are studying are dead. For me, this book changed my opinion of death. I have always associated death with being put into a hole in the ground and having your loved ones cry around you as your body is lowered into the earth. But this book made me realize that death can be so much more interesting than that. There are so many ways to donate your body to science and to help others even after you are no longer, spiritually that is, in this world. I learned a lot of new things in this book, and one of the biggest gains I feel I take away from reading it is that I have a new understanding of the history of death, and I can really clearly see the evolution of how death is treated in society, and how the course of death, and how with the course of death there comes loss, but there also comes gains for other people through death. For me, it's really interesting to think about imagining how many people's lives were saved by dead bodies being tested in these car crash simulators, and how the death isn't really this thing that is just final and ending, but really you can use your body and your death to improve the life of others and save lives. And I highly recommend this book to everyone. It's really interesting, and it gives a whole new perspective on the world of cadavers and what the afterlife really consists of. I thought this was a good picture because it's a woman standing with a cadaver, and it doesn't have to be a sad thing, it's just a happy picture because it's helping to better the lives of people who are still living. So thank you. Everyone should go read this book. It's very good.